published within the next 24 hours. Also, members are asked that if they would like to ask a question or be included in the conversation of a meeting, they must raise their hand. For those in person, here in person, and otherwise correct who is online and other people online, please. Also, could I ask all members who are submitting their apologies for any meeting of the IJB, please ensure that they advise the chair of the meeting and the business support team of who will be substituting for them in the meeting to ensure they receive all necessary paperwork ahead of the meeting. And can I please remind all report authors to assume that everyone has read the reports prior to the meeting and they are not required to provide a detailed update to the meeting. Okay, we are current, so we are happy to start. So welcome everybody. Today we do have quite a few apologies. We have apologies from Andy McFarlane. We have Emma Jordan as a substitute here today. We have apologies from Linda Dorwart, from Ken Donaldson, Pam Jamieson, Callum McDowell, Willem Gibbons, and also Vicky Kerr will be running slightly late, but we are current, so we're happy to start today. So thank you very much, everybody. Could I first ask if there are any declarations of interest in regards to the agenda today? And I don't see any hands up, so I assume we're happy. That's fine. Thank you very much. First of all, we go to item number 3. That's the minutes of the IJB, which was held on the 16th of December. Could I please ask members to confirm that they're happy to approve the minute of the meeting? Are there any matters of accuracy or any matters arising or covered on the agenda today? I don't see anybody raising their hands. In that case, can I ask, are we happy to approve the minutes? See people knowing their hands. So thank you very much. That's the minutes approved. Going on to the action list and rolling agenda matrix. The action list is always attached for information. Emma, will you take us through the action plan first?
Yes, 2 seconds. I'm just gonna
Sorry,
do the technology.
And I know Gareth is happy to chip in as well on actions.
Yes, so there's a couple ongoing. The first 2, Kirsty, they'll come up in the update that Donna and I think Kirsty as well are doing in terms of the directions. It was obviously agreed in December. Kirsty did do a presentation, but they were looking for a formal paper which was obviously attached today. So those 2 should be closed off after today. Right care, right place. People who were at the committee on the 3rd of March, Steph and Peter Bryden came in and gave an update on that, and this will be closed off. And if there is, I think there's an update in the committee action plan, which I can move on to. Complex care plan update, it was updated in December, but Caroline, she's going to bring an update to the June committee, so that'll be deferred. And then there was Kirsty, I think the bottom one in terms of to move the strategic alliance. I don't know, did you see that?
Yeah, there's probably something I need to pick up on that in terms of the direction that we are looking to issue on the third sector commissioning. And I think we need to ensure, and I'll just probably just table this now, we need to ensure that we're not closing down the 3-year contracts that we had agreed previously in the directions. I think we need to articulate that, and I'll work with Gration on that within the direction that was tabled at that committee. So I'll work offline on that and make sure that'll close down. And that will probably answer one of the queries that I think I've had a discussion with Jim on, and also Alan as well. So.
And following the committee, our first committee sessions that we did have on the 3rd, I actually wasn't there, but I sent all the draft notes around that are attached today with committee updates, and the actions were also update for both those committees, and I'll be brought back in June. I've been working with the people on that one. So other than that, I think that's okay in terms of the actions.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to add anything to any of the actions or has any questions or comments? Okay, in that case, we're happy to move on. Thank you very much, Amber. So next item is item number 5, which is a membership update and voting rights update. And first, you will take us through that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so there's just a couple of notes here and also a couple of approvals. So I did want to, and you'll see within the paper, the note, the extension of the suspension of the Vice Chair and suspension of a substitute voting member. However, I have just been informed yesterday the extension of the suspension of the Vice Chair will be lifted from 5 p.m. tonight. So we'll have a conversation about that after 5 o'clock tonight. Also, what I do want to do is welcome Nicola Hay from Scottish Care, as well as obviously Fiona Kane has stood down from her position. So Nicola is taking that place for the independent sector membership, and David Booth and Debbie Cochrane will act as deputies and will ensure appropriate cover at said committees as well. What I did also want to note is that, again, due to Fiona stepping down, Strategic Planning Group had a meeting on the 17th of March where they recommended approval that Isabel McKnight, as the Deputy Third Sector, will be invited to the next IJB and prove that she will chair the SPG moving forward. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Could we also note our thanks to Andy McFarland for stepping up as an interim vice chair during the suspension, and welcoming for that stuff here.
Thank you. So what I did want to highlight is that the regulations extending voting rights to service users and unpaid carer and third sector representatives on IJBs has been laid before Scottish Parliament and is due to come into force in September 2026. So this is essentially to ensure equal participation in shaping discussions affecting community health and social care services. There will be quite a significant amount of work going on in the background before September 26, but I'll keep you all appraised in terms of any kind of further actions that need to be taken for us locally. And that's all from me, Chair.
And thank you very much. Can I open it to the room for any questions or comments?
Yeah, thanks. I suppose just a comment in relation to 3.6, 3.7 about the voting rights. Unsurprising, I'm sure to members in the room, you were one of the only TSIs who were particularly opposed originally to the blanket extension of voting rights without the necessary training and structures that needed to be put in place to support representatives and the wider support structure or the representative structure that's needed. So, for example, the idea that a service user representative can represent the tens of thousands of people that use services, for example, isn't realistic. And also, I suppose there's a bit of a dynamic in the room, although the objective is about this parity. I think we've probably demonstrated our experience in this room that actually the representatives are able to easily influence and contribute to discussions with or without voting rights. So the idea that a right to vote brings parity to the room isn't always kind of, there's a whole structure that needs to be built. So I suppose I just want to acknowledge what's happened is effectively in reverse. The regulations have been laid with a promise to make the changes. We would have preferred all the changes first before the regulations were laid, but we are where we are. So I just wanted to recognise the fact that we are committed to working to make sure, with Kirsty and the team, to make sure that we can contribute with other representatives to those support structures that are needed locally, and also we don't have too much time if the regulations are to take effect from September. So I just wanted to note that, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the unpaid carers rep and voting rights, comforting, I hope to know that there is some work going on nationally with a national group of people in this position, and looking at identifying any training needs, support requirements and supports nationally, which will help people. And I've been at one of those meetings thus far in my tenure here, and a lot of the unpaid carers reps are find it challenging and daunting, and would rather get some help into it And of course, I'll take that with and keep Kirsty informed of any information I get around that.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think on both of your comments, this was obviously a decision that was done with very short consultation where we all put in, but it is a decision that has been made. And I think from a local point of view, you know, as an IJB, we will support the third sector and lived experience reps as much as we can, obviously. And if there are any identified training needs as well, then we'll make sure that is covered as well as much as we can. I think we are probably quite fortunate that I believe we have quite a good working relationship within this IJB. So we don't necessarily need that kind of voting or veto right as well. But I think, you know, having an open relationship where everybody can input is really important for us. So, and I hope we continue that open relationship where everybody can participate as much as possible.
So, just picking up on Colin's point and Ben's point as well. So I think we've come a long, long way as an IJB. Just in my time, it's for 6 years, we've come a long, long way. We have conversations that we need to have in a very respectful and constructive way, and there is no question in my mind that there has been really good influence from our sector, from independent sector, from care around this table and over the time I've been here. This is a change, though, and Alan's right to shine a light on it. This is quite a significant change, and I'm conscious it's a change that comes at the same time as we are trying to re-establish strategic planning group in the right way, to have the right focus and to provide the right advice to the IJB. And it comes at a time when there's actually been quite a turnover in IJB members, and I wonder if there's a need, and Gareth, you and I spoke about this just on Friday, and a need for a bit of development work, dedicated time and space for us as an IJB in terms of how we are together, how we work together, what it is we're here to do, and how we reflect those changes that are coming our way and how we operate. So we're building that really strong foundation going forward.
That's a really good point, and I think a development session might actually be appropriate for us, as everybody else think. And what we had. Yeah. I think it can just strengthen us as an IJB to talk about how we want to work together and take things forward as well. So I think that's something we need to plan into the agenda setting. I think we have a couple of times saved anyway for things, so we work offline to see where we can schedule that in and make that happen. Thank you. And any other comments or questions to this agenda item? I don't see any further hands, so thank you very much for that. And thanks a lot, Kirsty, for presenting that item. In that case, we move on to item number 6, which is an update on proposed new IJB directions. And I believe Donna is attending. Yeah, sorry. Hello, Donna. Morning.
And morning, members. The paper in front of you today is an update on the ongoing work around a proposed set of new IJB directions, which is on the back of the new integration scheme that's currently up with Scottish ministers for approval and sign off. We've taken the opportunity with the new scheme to actually go back and look at the statutory guidance around the directions, and we've taken a whole new approach to drafting a proposed set of directions, which is totally based on the statutory guidance that was issued. This is to make sure that we are legally compliant with the legislation, and this work is ongoing. There's quite a significant work to get through. We're looking at identifying outcomes and outputs for each of these new directions, and there will also be a bit of work around identifying the budgets that are associated with each direction. And the main aim is, because we've taken this new approach and we are actually basing the directions on functions and the services that are identified in the new integration scheme, is that these directions will be a set of directions for the lifetime of the integration scheme. So there will be opportunity for directions to be updated and amendments will be issued, etc. around those directions once they're agreed. However, that is the plan at the moment, is that this set will last for the lifetime of an integration scheme. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. Kirsten?
I did just want to follow up, Chair, and I suppose this is, we've actually talked about this in significant detail at committee level, so this is essentially for us to, the recommended approval of this approach for the IJB in terms of the decision making the IJB has. So I just wanted to highlight that, thanks.
Thank you very much, and quite right, we had a detailed discussion at the IJB committee as well around this. So as an IJB, we are asked to approve the approach as per the recommendation, and also noting that due to budget setting deadlines of both parties, local authority and NHS, work will continue to allocate that budget to the proposed new IJB directions. Note that work is continuing with responsible officers to identify outcomes and outputs within the anticipated delivery section across the proposed new IJB directions, and also agree to receive a finalized set of new IJB directions for approval on the 23rd of June 2026. And also note that all excellent directions relating to NHS services Appendix 2 will then be revoked and retained by the NHS board. So this is the ask to the IJB. Can I just open it up to the room for questions and comments, Ellen?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Donna, for the paper. We've had a good exchange, I think, at committee as well. So I do welcome the new approach to directions, particularly focus on outcomes that we talked about, and I suppose the recognition that's also reflected in the committee minutes that there's also some work to be done around the data we collect in order to measure some of the outcomes. So at the moment, a lot of our measures around service and access information and more performance of service, whereas a lot of the outcomes are focused on people feeling safe and having a better experience. So really welcome that approach and open, I guess, to bring the sector into those conversations about the data and insights that can be brought into that mix. So great to see progress. The one area I just wanted to highlight is the famous direction 2205, which is around the third sector commitment to 3-year funding cycles. I recognise that it's connected to the action that Kirsty has outstanding and to the next item about the new strategic commissioning plan. But I suppose it was just a highlight to members that there's a potential of removing some of that intent that's in a direction before we've got a direction to replace that protection. I don't think it's a particularly challenging space, I suppose, in terms of we've already agreed the commitment to the new strategic alliance and therefore we're taking that forward. But it's just to make that really explicit so members know you're taking that out before a new direction's in place, and an opportunity perhaps in this room for members to kind of reaffirm the commitment to multi-year investment through the new alliance, whether there is a direction in place or not yet. So I just wanted to highlight that to members in the room, Chair, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Kirsty, did you want to come back on that one?
Not particularly on that piece, but what I did want, just talking about development sessions, and I think given that it's quite significant change and there's a lot of detail that Donna and I have been working on with a part of Gareth's senior leadership team as well, that I'd probably suggest a workshop before the June IJB itself in terms of that kind of final sign off, just so that we're actually going through the detail and appraising all members and senior leadership team for the partnership, and bringing that all together in terms of a good conversation on all of that, and ensuring that we're all happy with how our approach is going to be taken forward.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. And I think again, a workshop is probably quite a good idea to talk about that.
Thanks, and I think it's a really good approach. I think it's laid out really clearly and precisely, so really welcome at Kirsty. And I think probably some of the conversation we're having in the workshop today about the population health framework and service renewal framework might inform some of those kind of outcome measures and what we need to think of in terms of putting some of that in, so that we do actually make that kind of prevention kind of focus shift. But I think the concept is really good, and I think they're really clear and really well laid out, which is really supportive of that. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, I would echo what Valerie said, and what I also said as well. I think this approach is really good. I like the level of detail that's now within these directions. I think you can now see these as being one of the three key levers that the IJB has at its disposal, and the specificity around the functions that are being covered, what we're looking to see delivered through those functions, and the outcomes we're looking to achieve through those functions is really good. That's something that's hugely supportive.
Yes, I think a couple of things. I mean, obviously, as we move into that new style of commissioning, there might be some, we might have to do things on a slightly shorter term basis just now, but the absolute intent is to continue with that multi-year funding. I think it's almost impossible for third sector colleagues to plan in any meaningful way if we're only giving them. We're in the situation at the moment where I still don't know if I'm funded for a certain service as of the 1st of April at the moment, and I've got people that are working in that service. I've got people who don't know whether they're going back to their substantive post. And we just can't be in a position ultimately in the long term to work with a third sector like that. So regardless of directions and how it all plays out with the transition, that's absolutely still the commitment and plan from the Commission perspective. I think for me as well with the directions, given the financial situation, given that, we'll come on to a little bit later, I think that having that budget aligned to what we're delivering is going to be really important so that we can actually, give you confidence as an IJB, but actually if there is additionality, we need to be in a position where we can say, well, if we're going to deliver something at, X amount of money here, there has to be somewhere else within that pot that comes out of, because I think perhaps that's been something that's not been there in the directions previously. So I think that's going to be really important as well. So.
Thank you. Mark?
I just wanted to raise a question, and maybe I should pick up on another paper. It was just around the extant directions being retained by the health board. I think it might be helpful within the paper if there's 3 or 4 lines just outlining the rationale for why those directions have been retained within the health board. Just in case, I think further down the line there was questions around, why were those extant directions retained and not retained by the IJB. It might be helpful, although I think we're clear around the table the rationales around these are acute services that rightly sit within that acute service space. It might be worthwhile just capturing the rationale. Other than that, I really agree with the direction of travel.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, so that might be an action to come up.
Yeah, and we've got a database now, we've got a whole kind of new reporting system in terms of if anything's closed now, we're evident the rationale for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely will ensure we do that, Mark.
Any other comments or questions?
I suppose it's just a reflection because the board's looking at its performance framework and its committee's performance measures as well. And I think there's maybe a track in how there's a bit of alignment between the two. So, for example, the last Strategic Planning Commission, I took the paper from the Public Health Committee that had the data that would give assurance around some of these to the IJB. And I think we're small teams here, so it's how we can actually be smarter in terms of our reporting and not having to write multiple different papers. So there's maybe a trick here, Kirsty, in terms of some of that alignment that could make everybody who's reports to us lives a bit easier and measuring the same things where possible.
Yeah, and I think we used that by way of an example, didn't we, Valerie, that actually the information there, we just need to be making sure it's all joined up and we're not asking people to duplicate, putting different templates, etc. So yeah, there's definitely something, and we work very closely with governance officers from both local authority and NHS as well. So we just need to kind of get that a little bit more streamlined so it's less onerous for people.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think it's a transition period anyway, so I think there will be a lot of work in the background happening. And I think, the intent is very much for that long-term stability as well that will come out of it. And like we heard, obviously, the budget process and everything else are still ongoing, so the allocation is ongoing. But once we have done all of that, going forward, that should be much easier also to plan ahead and to smooth things out. But I think, the conversation is definitely happening in the right place, so that's really good. So thank you so much for presenting that paper. As I said, we are being asked to approve this approach. Can I just ask that the voting members present are happy to approve? Happy to approve and happy to note and agree as stated earlier as well. So thank you very much for that, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on to item that is the impacts of revised countries getaway information scheme, and Kirsty are presenting on behalf of the government. Apologies. Sorry, apologies. My notes are wrong.
Sitting behind you. So yes, thank you, Chair.
the paper on the impacts of the revised reducing of integration scheme. So a paper came to the IJB in December to keep IJB members informed and updated with regard to the integration scheme review and the outcomes of that process. So as you are aware, the outcomes of the review were firstly to reconfigure the responsibilities for health services delegated to the Integration Joint Board and those to be retained by the NHS Board, and to move from 5 working members for each of the parties. Parties, of course, being the NHS Board and Council, to 4 voting members. So this paper is very much follow on from that December paper to update members again on the current status of the revised integration scheme and to highlight the impacts of the changes on current integration arrangements. But before highlighting those impacts, IG members are asked to note that the revised integration scheme with these changes was submitted to Scottish ministers in December and is currently awaiting approval. So that's the current status of the revised integration scheme. The first significant change to reconfigure the responsibilities for health services will mean that the Integration Joint Board will no longer be responsible for the planning and delivery of health services, to be retained by the NHS Board, and a list of those retained services is included on Appendix 1 of the paper for members. The Integration Joint Board may determine that any IJB documents contained within the IJB documentary framework that include or make reference to health services retained by the NHS Board will need to be revised or replaced going forward. And contained within this paper is the recommendation to review the strategic commissioning plan as an example of one of those documents that will obviously reference these services previously delegated to the Integration Joint Board once the scheme receives ministerial approval. So the second significant change included in the revised integration scheme is the move from 5 voting members from each party to 4. So this will mean a total of 8 voting members for the IJB going forward. Point in the paper that I would like to highlight, Chair, is I think it's under section 5 of the paper, which talks about the resources for the Integration Joint Board going forward and the resource implications. And I've highlighted there that the NHS Board, along with, the IJB Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer, obviously will need to set aside amounts in respect of large hospitals for use by the Integration Joint Board. So there will be a set aside arrangement for the Integration Joint Board financially that didn't previously exist. And I think they're just the main points of the paper that we'd highlight to you about happening.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Any questions or comments in regard to the paper and content? Well, there's quite a lot of detail in it as well, but I know we have also discussed it at various points before, so it's not new. Any questions or comments, reflections? I don't see any hands up, so I think it's going to be a really quick one. Thank you very much, Vicky. So you're asking us to note, obviously, the health services to be retained by the NHS Board, as in Appendix 1 approves the recommendation to review the current SCP. Notes that recommendations to retain, revise, or replace other key documents that more broadly from the IJB supporting a documentation framework will also come forward in due course. Revoke all extant directions relating to NHS services, Appendix 2, now retained by the NHS Board. And also note that the number of IJB voting members has changed from 5 to 4 for both the NHS Board and Dumfries and Galloway Council, also known as the Council, each party to the integration scheme together as the parties. So are we happy to approve all of these and not all of these? Vicky, I assume we obviously, and this will only come into place once it's been approved by the Scottish Government. So we are approving it, but it doesn't come into place straight away. We need to wait for Scottish Government to give the final approval as well. When that arrives, I'm sure you will let us know, and then we'll take it from there. So thank you very much, everybody. Vicky, I know you also have an item under any other business, and seeing that you're joining us right now, would you like to take that right now?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. So yes, the second paper that I'm bringing to the IJB today is just to inform the members of the Integration Joint Board on the use of national planning and delivery arrangements. So this is the first of a planned series of regular reporting to inform Integration Board on the development of subnational planning and delivery, and to keep members briefed and updated with regard to regional planning and delivery of health services. There has, of course, always been regional planning for some health services, but DL25 lays out a new structure and a population-based planning approach to this regional planning. And the background section of this paper lays out key milestones in some detail over the 12-month period between DL31, that was in November 2024, and DL25 in November 2025. So these milestones have led to NHS Scotland establishing and implementing a new subnational planning structure. While some health services will be planned regionally, accountability for all health services will remain with the NHS board. So that's quite an important point to remember that I've highlighted in the paper. Work is beginning in the subnational delivery groups, both East and West, to deliver on the identified key priorities. I've laid those key priorities out for members in 3.2.7 of the paper. However, more detailed reporting on subnational work and arrangements and subnational plans will be submitted to the IJB as this work evolves. So whilst progress is being made implementing DL25, this is still in the very early stages, and work to deliver and develop subnational planning is still very much at the beginning at this time. So it was just to bring it at that early stage to the Integration Joint Boards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. We appreciate the early side of this, even if it's early days yet. Can I ask, does anybody have any questions or comments in regards to the subnational planning and delivery papers that Vicky just presented?
Vicky, what is the anticipated role for the IJB apart from being informed this work? Are we going to be part of it, or just understand?
The key priorities will certainly touch on whole system and the need for whole system planning going forward. I think because it's still at the very early stages yet, that clarity with regard to how much, which of those priorities that will involve, Gracie, and I think that we will need to wait on the development, the further development of the plans. So as you know, there's plans being drafted, or there's in DL25, it is asking for plans to be drafted for East and West of Scotland. I think once we see those plans, I think that some of that clarity might come through in those, more than we have at this time. That's it.
I think that would be good to have that early kind of bring that up to the board, just understanding what will be the role for the IJB, because some of this is by the NHS.
Yes. Yes.
It would be good really to kind of, apart from being informed, what is the role for the IJB within this work? Yeah.
The DL25 talks about keeping IJBs informed, but the DLs did go to boards, and that, as I say, the accountability for those health services sits with boards, but there will be a role for IJBs going forward, but we'll await the clarity on what that is.
Thank you again.
Yeah, and it probably is worth noting that it is quite in its infancy as well, Gracie, and I think that the improving flow is the unscheduled care piece as well, which is delegated and is a must in terms of their integration scheme. So there will be elements that you need to have sight of in terms of the impact as well. So, but definitely keep everybody appraised on that.
As soon as more details are known, it will come back to the IJB as well. I'm sorry, David.
First again, kind of stole my thunder. I think there are some, invisible questions, I think there are some conversations still under the around where IJBs fit and how they play into, in particular, the National Planning and Delivery Committee for Scotland West. So I think we need to see that coming through, but there's a slight tension around all of that stuff in terms of what's planned on a subnational basis, but having to be delivered on a local basis, and how that works through the current governance arrangements. And we spoke about some of this yesterday in the board workshop. Those governance arrangements are still being developed and refined, and we're meant to just have a look at them as they are. So it's very much a bit, but Work in progress is a great way to describe it, Gracie, thank you. But we do need to keep IJB informed as to what's happening in that space and what the role is and opportunity then to us. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think as Kirsty says, the unscheduled care element technically will still be delegated to the operation that will sit under Nicole, but you can't fix acute flow without taking a system approach to it. So I'm sitting on the subgroup as chief officer, so making sure that we are part of the discussions around unscheduled care in particular and what that looks like on a whole system basis. So I'll feed back to the IJB, but I will be on that group.
Yeah, good to know that somebody with an IJB view has a seat at the table as well, because it's really important that we get involved. Any more questions or comments? Don't see anybody else, so thank you very much, Vicky, for presenting that today as well, and thank you for joining us today. Okay, moving on to item number 8, that is the IJB committee updates. We have moved to a new committee structure, and we have only had 2 out of the 4 committees, and that's why we have only 2 updates today. The first one is the IJB Audit Risk and Governance Committee, which was Gareth Willen, who has sent apologies today. So Gareth, you will give us a quick update, please.
Yeah, so obviously you've got the paper we have just described, and I think obviously the main focus was around risk, around our strategic risks, but then we are now taking an action forward to start to describe the more operational risks and what that risk appetite is as an IJB, etc. And going back some more detail of that to the future meetings. We then just talked about the draft external audit plan with Audit Scotland, so there's going to be some changes within Audit Scotland. I think the chief auditor that was for Dumfries Galleries now moving on, so we'll find out what's happening there in due course. I think it's Fiona Mitchell Knight was the auditor that's now leaving, so that transition will happen. But there was no concerns from the auditors as part of that. And then we talked about our internal auditing and what we need to do around making sure that's definitely very joined up between the 2 constituent partners. So with Julie and from the health side and colleagues and the council side looking at what that the audit plan for next week looks like and what we're going to be starting to focus on in terms of that one. For next year. That was mainly the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments in regards to the committee or any additions? Don't see any hands up, so I think thank you so much, Gareth, for giving us a quick update. The second committee was the IJB Strategic Planning, Finance and Commissioning Committee, which I chaired. A lot of the items that we discussed are on today's agenda anyway, so I'm not going to go into too much detail in regards to those. One of the big items was in regards to right care, right place, especially in regards to flexible beds. And the committee would like to recommend approval to the IJB. The committee anonymously approved the year 2 proposal, where Linda formally moved approval and members expressed support for ongoing updates and share of positive outcomes. So we would like to recommend that the IJB also formally does so as well. We discussed finances, which again we haven't finance on the agenda, so I won't go into that one right now. We also talked about impacts on the revised fiscal integration scheme, which we already heard from today anyway. The annual commissioner plan update again is part of this IJB anyway, and then the new integration joint board directions, which we discussed as well. In regards to right care, right place and the flexible bed, the year 2 proposal means that there is a plan now for moving forward in line with the year 1 that has already been concluded now. There were detailed operational improvements, financial implications and plans to enhance communication about patient benefits as well, support and feedback from committee members as well. The service model and operational focus was planned to continue with 21 flexible beds, prioritizing intermediate care, step up, step down from frailty units, hospital at home, palliative care and discharge to assess, with improvements to the interface hub and service pathways. Geographical distribution and procurement. Steph explained to us that the team is reviewing bed utilization to ensure equitable coverage across the region, particularly addressing east-west distribution following an initial procurement process. There is a patient and provider experience where Mark and Andy requested that future communications and reports highlight patient-centered benefits as well. and also clinical outcomes, not just financial aspects. And the financial impact obviously is also part of it. So committee recommended that IJB would approve that as well. So that is probably all I want to cover right now from the committee. Happy to open it up for questions and comments.
Chair, if it's appropriate, I'm interested in the follow-up discussions from 3.4 in the paper, page 3, which related to the strategic needs assessment. And I know there's a thread throughout the cover about to have more of those conversations, I think, across the rest of the day. But I'm curious as to whether there's an update, particularly on the suggestion that the IJB or through the partnership takes to community planning partners, what might need to happen to do joint strategic needs assessments, so we don't have each of the partners doing its own data gathering and needs assessments, and that can be done and planned for in a joint way. So I suppose I won't discuss today. One of the outstanding questions at committee was the governance arrangements around that, who owns what bit. But my view is still it's worth a conversation to take to the partnership and get that to direction.
Kirsty, did you want to comment?
Yeah, that is one of my actions I'm taking forward in the next couple of weeks, just to understand the governance arrangements around that, and any implications, and then actually how do we take that forward as a plan.
Thank you. Yeah. And I completely agree, Ellen, about the joint approach and the importance to streamline things as well at the same time. So I think that's definitely the intention there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose a bit of a reflection on previous experience in that space. So it's absolutely, Alan's right, it's absolutely the right thing to do, to streamline and to undertake such needs assessments jointly is 100% right thing. It gives a more balanced, a broader, better perspective on the needs of the population and how to respond to those needs. We have tried this probably about 2 years ago. We tried to engage with community planning partners around let's agree a priority list of chapters for a joint strategic needs assessment, and let's agree the contribution that each community planning partner will make to developing those. And it was really difficult to get buy-in to identify those priorities, and it was even harder to get commitment of resources. We did see some progress with things. Donna's still moving to things like the carers strategic needs assessment that underpinned our carers strategy and carers delivery plan came through from that work. The work around the GMS and the data pack to underpin that came through from that work. The work that's still underway on the alcohol and drug partnership came through from that work. But it was, if I'm being honest, quite driven from an IJB perspective and not from the wider community planning partnership. I think there is a bit of work to be done there in terms of how we work with them together to prioritise and allocate resources.
Thank you very much, David. Any other questions or comments?
I think it's a really, really complex space because there is needs assessed, so like the strategic housing, the local housing strategy, so that for the needs assessment done. There's been the children's services plans, there's been a needs assessment that's been done as well, and they've all drawn on various bits of. So it's not like that hasn't been needs assessments that are actually done. It's kind of how it's all kind of pulled together, and there's maybe not that duplication of effort. And I know there's some national work that's ongoing through the subnational planning about what actually is a good joint strategic needs assessment and what are the kind of core data sets in relation to that. So that's kind of in train at the moment, but the challenge almost is the deadlines for the strategic commissioning plan and what needs to be in place in relation to that. And I actually think there's quite a lot of information that's already out there that could be drawn on and that could be used. So the trick is almost how we use the idea, so it's not sort of pulling on the other areas rather than duplicating it. But I suppose it's getting the resource to do that, because you do actually need people to pull all these streams together and collate all of that. And I think that's maybe an area that's going to be a bit of a challenge over the next while.
Just to come back in and about this point, actually there's a workshop right now, talk about what a good joint strategic assessment looks like. So I'm talking detail on the work this afternoon, But you'll see from the service renewal framework, there was a year-long commitment from Scottish Government to undertake a joint strategic use assessment to underpin population planning. And that's been kind of stepped back a wee bit in terms of it's not a holistic joint strategic needs assessment that's been undertaken. Now it seems to be quite targeted joint strategic needs assessments around the specific priority topics for subnational planning. And so just reflecting on what Valerie said, there's a lot of chapters that we can currently draw on that have been undertaken already and weave that together. And I guess the questions we go through the workshop this afternoon is if the IJB feels as though it needs further work done to understand local need, can we do that in a very targeted way? Can we be quite prescriptive about the areas that we want to focus on? Because that might make the allocation of resources to complement what's already there that little bit easier.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So you've been nodding. David, did you want to come?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, I don't think we should have a free-for-all and just all, you know, there needs to be a plan and a structure and things that we're doing. I think for me, my big concern at the moment, and I'll come on to it a little bit, I think, as I present for the savings plan, is that we have got finite resource. And I think we're very much in danger of, again, describing the problems that we all know were already there, and we actually don't go and fix it. You know, we spend an awful lot of time describing the problems and describing how we're going to fix it. We don't seem to spend as much time on actually operationally fixing it. So I think we need to be balanced around how we do that work, because, you know, we don't have a big resource to be able to, as a health and social care partnership, do this work. And clearly, you know, good NHS colleagues and council colleagues that come and support that work, but actually in terms of operational teams to deliver it, we're not hugely, you know, not got a lot of resource in that team. So I think we just need to balance those things up, because in the moment, and as you'll probably see shortly, we are not in a position where we can stand still. So
thank you very much for that reminder. Very important context, obviously. Are there any more comments or questions?
So can I just come back with a last reflection, and I take the point with David's raised. There is a part that's about what do we already know, might not be visible for everyone, but what do we all collectively already know, which is hugely important. I suppose my thinking about taking that to the partnership space, which is everyone in the room, is you at least have the explicit conversation that says, are we saying we don't have the resource and therefore can't? So we're asking the question, because that's the place where partners might decide, no, we can't do that, and therefore we're all setting off, we know the lay of the land. But I think that community planning space is a space where we should be talking to each other across all the systems and services. And if we do get the outcome, as David described, because we're stuck, absolutely fine. It's then really for me, my view then, on the community planning part, to say what could we do? What is the part of the possible, rather than just saying it's all too difficult. But the one thing we do know is that constantly working in individual components of organisations doesn't create any more resource either. So we can at least make the best use of all of it. And I suppose my thinking was, rather than it being here and guessing what others might need to do, the best place to have that conversation is in the partnership, where the Health and Social Care Partnership has a seat at the table too. So I do strongly still think the question needs to be asked, even if the answer is not right now all too difficult, prioritise some things. I do think not asking the question just lets us carry on another 12 months in the status quo, which doesn't help anyone either. So just feel that's just where my thought process was, not that we're going to magic up anything new, but without having the conversation, we won't do anything different, I suppose.
Fair comment, Phil.
Gareth and I both sat in the community planning senior leadership team, so the next meeting of that is in May, so we could take a conversation into that space and see what the feedback is in relation to that. And there might be more kind of emerging information coming through from workshops and kind of subnational planning stuff that might help inform that. So but I don't think there's a quick answer to the joint approach to it. I suppose it's what I'm thoughtful of.
Yeah, I think that's very much trying to find a balance between ambition and reality as well, where, you know, we need to find the medium that works for everything as well. So the intention is very much for a joint approach as much as we can do it, but we also need to be realistic how that looks like. I think would be the summary of our conversation here today. So I think there is definitely the thought through take. So thank you. Any further questions or comments on this committee update? Any further heads up? So could I just take it back to you were asked, the committee recommended that the IJB will approve the Dexawet plan that was brought forward. Can I ask the voting members if we're happy with that as well? Yes, if you're having. So thank you very much for that. That is item number 8. So moving on to item number 9, and Gareth, you already hinted at it. So first of all, Gareth will give us a little bit of an introduction, and then afterwards it goes over to Frank.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm going to just take you through a little quick presentation just to put a little bit of context around where we're at from an IJB and Health and Social Care Partnership perspective and what we're looking to do going forward around creating a kind of sustainable system in the future. Before I start, I've done this presentation in multiple different guises in different places, and one of the pushbacks I get is that, you know, people are working really hard, people, you know, and it might seem quite critical. I think what I'd like to say is this is about the system not working. Systems behave the way that systems are designed to behave. You know, there's people in the system doing, and the fact that this is replicated across, I think, virtually every IJB in Scotland to one extent or another, to me would suggest we've got system challenges and system barriers. It's not about individuals within the system doing or not doing things. But first of all, I wanted to just talk about the scale of the challenge and really understand that we cannot keep doing what we're doing. We can't cut our way out of it. We can't salami slice out of it. We are really looking at starting to do some real changes in terms of reshaping what does it actually look like in the future. So if we can.
Greg can see it if I do it like this. Greg, can you see that if I move it along? Oh, they can.
So obviously we'll share the slides with people. So I won't go into this massive detail, but you know, so I did a snapshot on the 8th of March. We had 59 people in hospital in a care home pathway, 29 of whom were already delayed. And remember, that delayed discharge means they're deconditioning every day, their needs are getting greater, they've become at much higher risk of delirium, infection, hospital falls, etc. And there's another 31 in the community. At that point in time, we had 4 elderly mental illness beds and no residential care beds in the whole of D&G. One of our challenges around our care home market is that we have increased from 23 to 30 months length of stay in the last 2 years. We've lost 60 care home beds in the last 3 years, with another 28 currently at risk. Given our demographics and what we're seeing in terms of our older population and the peak of 35 to 36, you know, we're in a difficult position if we don't look at doing something differently. Moving into our unscheduled care space, our ED attendance rate is 320 per 100,000, which the Scottish average is 226. We've one of the highest conveyance rates by Scottish Ambulance Service in the country. Our cumulative bed days, so the numbers of people delayed, is one metric. It's a metric that Scottish Government look at. But actually, for me, the real metric is how long are they delayed? And actually, if you look at our cumulative bed days, it is just rising exponentially. So although the numbers are a bit higher than they've ever been by 10 or 15, the amount of time people are now stuck in hospital is significantly increasing. Starting to then come to some of the kind of wider demographic measures. There was some research came out, not research, report came out a couple of weeks ago. So now the average years of healthy life in Scotland is 59.4 years for females and 59.1 for men. But when we look at that based on socioeconomic status, there's a huge disparity. So right in the kind of top decile, people could be healthy right into their 70s and 80s. In the lower decile, you're in the mid-40s. And what we're seeing now is that men in the lower decile will spend 40% of their life in ill health, and women will spend 33% of their life in ill health. If we don't find a way to turn that around, we do not have the resource, we don't have the services, we don't have the staff, and we don't have anything to manage that level of need and health needs in the future for people being 40% of their life. Again, looking at, we've talked about shifting left for Christie report, the Feely report before that. We've really found it very difficult to do that because of the way we're funded, because of where Scottish Government puts money at times in terms of how we spend it. But we actually know that for every pound we spend on a home, we would save 17 pounds in terms of the cost of inpatient beds. We have had throughout the whole winter a ward full of people who could have been at home, but we're unable to shift the budgets in the way that we would like to. So then again, looking at care at home, so I won't go through the detail in huge detail, but these are people that are not receiving care at the moment. So it's 165, 108, another 17 in hospital, 14. If we had provided care to all of those adults that were waiting for care, it would have cost 2.8 million yearly costs. But already, as Sean will go into in a lot more detail, we're already looking to save 7 million on the budget next year. If we then look into the non-social care, the mental health directorate's savings target this year is 1 million. Mid Park is 18 delayed discharges, which is 20% of the bed base. Justin, the general manager, his cost base is almost exclusively staffing. So without being able to reduce the footprint of what we do as a mental health service on a statutory basis from an NHS perspective, we're getting to the point where those savings are just not there anymore. The Community Health Directorate is a saving of 3.5 million, with 1.3 million for operational services and 2.2 million in the reduction of medicine spend in prescribing. And our overall savings target for NHS Dumfries and Galloway, which will obviously change in terms of the way that it will work with the scheme of delegation. But overall, we're looking to save 18.1 million. And that only gets us back to the 23 million agreed overspending for the Scottish Government within a 3-year cycle. And our CTAC service, which supports GPs as part of the framework, the GP contract, where we do provide a service around dressings, complex dressings, catheter care in the community. We've just had to take on another £267,000 cost pressure into next year, which will have to come from somewhere else. So that's the landscape that we're in. And one of the things that we're really clear about is a partnership, and what we're starting to really work through is we have to do this differently. We have to work in integration in a different way. Because ultimately we can't just keep picking people up after they fall over. We need to stop them falling in the first place, because we can't afford to keep picking them up, never mind the impact on people, but the impact on the system. So looking at where we can from an integration perspective. So I was really lucky when I worked in Australia. I was able to go over to New Zealand and visit the Canterbury Health System, which is Christchurch. And it was highlighted at that point in time by the King's Fund as one of the top performing integrated systems in the world. And just looking at some of the learning that they looked at was obviously thinking system-wide. We talk about thinking system-wide, but we've just had the conversation just now about it's very difficult not to think in silos. It's very difficult not to, look at your own little bit. And that's not even out with community planning partners. That's trying to work out, medicine and surgery can sometimes, even in the hospital, have a medicine or using surgery beds. And, Nicole, from an acute perspective, thinking about what you're doing around daily discharges is stopping us having people in for surgery. So it's really starting to understand that. One of the things they did was they really invested in integration before they looked at their structures. I think it's probably fair to say around Scotland, we can't legislate integration. It's about relationships, it's about people coming together. And some of the IJBs, and this one, I think people earlier on were absolutely right, does function well in that regard. There are good relationships. That's not because there's an act. Well, it's not because it's because that's the way that's been built and working. So they really looked at the relationships, how we work together, how we work as a system, how we break down those barriers, rather than setting up governance structures and setting up all the other stuff first. One of the things they really will try to lean into is make it easy to do the right thing. It's actually quite hard to do the right thing in our system at the moment. The flexible beds for our GP colleagues would be a good example. The GP can send an older person up to the hospital with one phone call to the medical assessment unit. You can make 14 calls and get stuck in an argument between, well, it's the social care bed and this is a health thing, and we just go in this massive thing where the GPs, as far as I understand it, aren't sitting twiddling their thumbs, just able to make calls all day to do that. So really thinking about how do we make it easy to do the right thing, get rid of some of those barriers, some of those things that help us do it differently. It's so obvious that we're saying it, but we don't focus on keeping people well and out of hospital as much as we should. We absolutely have to do that. The other thing that was really clear about Canterbury was they were very flexible. They used the data really, really well. If they started doing something that didn't work, they stopped doing it and did something different. You know, there was none of this, you know, we'll look at it in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. If it wasn't working, move the goal and change it. Again, digital is an enabler. We can get stuck a little bit in digital being the answer to everything. Digital will not be the answer to everything. It's only going to be part of a toolkit. We can't have a goal to become a digital organisation because it just won't work for some of our people. But again, we can use it in a much better way. And I think the other thing was very clearly just engage people really early in the process. You know, one of my big bugbears around co-production is that when we do co-production, we take like, you know, this is what it's going to be and what colour do you want to paint the walls. That's not co-production, that's ticking the box. And actually, if we do co-production properly, we will not design systems and services in the way we do at the moment, because often it's not what people want and it's not what people tell us. So Canterbury started in the same way as everybody else. It was siloed, it was competitive, it was fragmented. You know, there was all sorts of bits that just wouldn't come together. And what we did was work really, really hard to bring that into a kind of single system view. So we just move on again. So when you start to bring the pieces together, you get that collective ownership, shared orientation. You know, one of the things Canterbury did really well was they behaved like one budget. If they didn't have one budget, they were funded in exactly the same way as everybody else, but all the partners got in the room and had the adult conversations around there is absolutely no point in, you know, the council saving £1 if it costs health £50 and otherwise, you know, in the real utopia of this, if we have a huge challenge around moving people with mental health conditions into supported housing so they get stuck in Mid Park. Well, actually, we might need a joint view of how do we fund a housing project in the future, because actually it's all the same money ultimately. So actually thinking about that shared orientation and how you co-own things and use data to create that trust. Move beyond anecdote, beyond this is what I think, but actually have more objective conversations. And they ended up with next one. And that was their system. And it was really, really simple. That lady in the middle is Agnes. And their whole process was just not to waste Agnes's time. And how you waste her time is if she has to travel too far for something you could have brought to her. If she has to, you know, sit on a waiting list is wasted time. Sitting in ED when you're not being actively treated is wasted time. So you can see there they did everything they could to bring as much to Agnes's house. Other things were as close by as they could be, and then, you know, the tertiary specialist hospitals, they were really the end of a pathway, not the beginning, which is often the way we shaped the kind of work at the moment.
Should say Alliance Commission.
Oh, there we go. So a few things we're looking at doing. So we're looking at that Alliance Commissioning to really start to think about how we can work in place, how we can work within communities, how we can, you know, enable our third sector and other partners to work more flexibly. So we become an enabler rather than a commissioner almost in that space to try and support that and work that through. But really having that community first lens and supporting people at home to have their own autonomy, living independently, looking better at use of the self-directed support, enablement, re-ablement, really looking at that strengths-based approach and really seeing how do we look at early intervention and prevention and what does long-term care look like in the future given the challenges we've got around our care home market and other things. So the Alliance Commission, which we're moving towards on the 1st of April, we've started a social SPS, I can't remember the acronym. I never remember. Basically, it's the starting towards an alliance principle of working. Alan, yeah, PSP. PSP, that's it. I really get the acronym right. Public social partnership. With our third sector partners to start looking towards this. So instead of it being, if we move on, Amber, that very traditional, we're a commissioner, we give out separate money to different people and we then tend to measure widgets and we tend to measure how many people go through rather than outcomes for people and the power holds within us. I was at the Alliance Scotland conference yesterday and we were doing that, and one of the really strong messages for me was we talk about shifting left and we talk about shifting the money left and we need to But that still is shifting money left, and what they were talking about is actually the power needs to shift left. Actually, that we have to give communities that way of working in a different way. So what we then look at is one contract with one performance framework. So we're just as much part of that alliance as anyone else. Looking at overall performance, trust and transparency, and how we then look at, you know, change, innovation and delivery. That's expected, that's part of it. We have to flex, we have to move around. What we tend to find in that space is that third sector partners, independent partners in particular, are much more able to flex much quicker than we are as a statutory organisation. So that's what we're looking to move towards in the next 3 to 5 years ultimately. But we've started that process as the previous IJB. So what we've seen just very quickly by having that, so Scottish Borders did a kind of community-led front door where, you know, people would engage initially with a kind of triage process where it was non-statutory, and actually we saw the number of people waiting on the waiting lists reduce quite significantly. And the whole purpose of that is not about reducing the waiting list. It's about making sure that we do what we're really good at that really critical end where people have real need and they don't get lost in the masses where actually there are other people better placed to deliver that support and deliver that care for the people so that we can actually get back to doing what we're really good at and empower our other people within that alliance to do what they are really good at. Because at the moment, my big worry is when I look at the multitude of people that are on the waiting list in the community, there will be some really critical need that we are missing in that space. So we need to think about how to do it differently. And then this is just another example from North Lanarkshire. They did again very similar community assessment front door where it was more kind of third sector community based, you know, signposting into things that weren't statutory. And again, they saw that number of people waiting for assessment reduced quite significantly. And again, we're able to really focus in on that high level of need for the people that really need it. And obviously, prevention is better than cure. We know that. We've known that for I don't know how long. But if we really need to start thinking about how do we move that money and that resource into that prevention space. So looking at that population health approach, we know the impact of poor housing. We know the impact of lack of opportunity and employment. We know that deprivation is a significant driver of you know, poor outcomes in the long term. We can move more into the screening, the secondary prevention things, which I think we're actually good at. One of my worries, I don't know if people remember, but when breast cancer screening first came onto the kind of table, there was some ethical conversations about you have to be able to treat something that you screen for, you know, and will we be able to, if we're screening for breast cancer, and we were. I've got a real worry now when we look at, and not in Scotland, but I've worked in other parts of the country where cancer screening, people are waiting phenomenal lengths of time for cancer treatment. So actually, if we're screening for things, we need to be able to make sure that the system and the hospital system is protected because it delivers that really high level care to people that really need it. So that's the kind of where we're looking at. And then that tertiary prevention, looking at dietetics, foot care for people with diabetes, you know, rehabilitation for people who've experienced a stroke. We know the outputs of all these, but we still throw money at the front door. We still throw £100 million at unscheduled care for hospital at home, for elderly failure units, for all these things. But actually, if we don't turn that tap off, we're not going to be able to get to a sustainable future. And this is, if you wonder why it looks like a 5-year-old did it, it's that I did it and I haven't managed to get anyone to fix it for me yet. And this is the extent of my PowerPoint skills. But one of the things, for example, we're looking at our hip fracture pathways, say, and the hip fracture pathway is really good to look at. It's really easy to measure. We know behind it. Time from front door to knife has a significant impact on outcome. How long it is until you get out of bed has a significant impact on outcomes. So we can measure it and we can make it as efficient as possible, as safe as possible. And one of the teams here actually won the Golden Hip Award recently for doing some phenomenal work in that space. But if we don't start looking at our hip fracture pathway in the active life space, by putting on classes that are evidence-based, that we know reduce the risk of falls by 40%. We know reduce the impact of frailty by 33%. Frailty is reversible. You know, that's the other thing that we don't, you can actually regain function if you go through some of these programs. So if we don't actually start to think of an IJB as a health and social care partnership, that actually let's stop paying 30 grand for everybody that falls over, which is kind of predicted system cost of a hip fracture, notwithstanding that then after hip fracture, a lot of people are then in the last 2 years of life, and it'd be hugely difficult experiences for people. But actually, let's look at spending 10 grand so 5 of them don't fall over. So this is where we really need to start thinking about the balance shifting and how we do that while we are trying to come to what Sean will talk about in a minute around that. And then one of the things we're really trying to look at doing is how do we make the right choices now that don't kind of hamper us in the future. So we just move on. People might have heard us talk about this, but we're trying to look at things in a 3-horizon model. So this is what strategic alliance will look like. So, you know, one of the things we agreed as an IJB was to protect the third sector budget, because if you don't protect the third sector budget, how can you then authentically go out and talk about we want to alliance, we see the importance of the third sector, we see what that does. So the easy decision would be to top slice the 5% like we did off other services, but actually the decisions you make now have to get you towards, and it's, I think probably Alan made that conversation a little bit easier with colleagues, that we didn't take money out of them while we were trying to tell them that that was the case. The other thing, for example, you know, some of the health and social care partnerships have looked at closing their activity resource centres for adults with complex needs. Absolutely, from a financial perspective, that's the easy decision to make here and now, because I think it's about 4 million that would take off from a savings perspective. But all of those people that are maintained at home, they're able to maintain a level of independence, their families are able to engage because they get that respite when their family members are ARCs. When that all starts to fall down, that costs you 3 times as much in year 3, year 4, year 5. So really trying to think that we're not making short-term decisions that then just kick the can down the road to cost us more. So that's the kind of principle around how we're looking at our services in the next kind of 3 years and beyond. I'm really looking at that they're developing different models of care. So we have been meeting with Wheatley Homes in particular, and we're working with our care home providers. Wheatley have got some really good models of care around older people, assisted and kind of living, and looking into that more and multi-generational living, and how we can look at, you know, our university here, and then, you know, what does that look like? I think we need to remain flexible with our teams and how we design, we adapt to changing needs. You know, if the home teams need to change slightly, or if our community mental health teams need to adapt, we need to be within the, you know, there's rules around how we do things differently and how we work with colleagues to make changes, but I think we need to be much more adaptable. We need to be much closer to the communities to further develop the health and social care components of the place plans. I took a place plan to one of my general managers recently, who had an action on the place plan and he'd never seen the place plan. So I think we need to be much, much closer to how that is. And actually, it's not about this is what we're coming out to do to you, but what do you need as a community? We need to be honest, we need to be transparent, we need to set the expectation. We won't be able to do everything for everyone. And I think what we've talked about, but we're already really starting to look at that wider ecosystem. So working with Jamie Little around the housing agenda, what does that look like? Engaging with, you know, third sector with Teresa Galloway's transport piece. So we have committed to the kind of 3-year funding of that, and starting to work with education colleagues and others. And that is absolutely not exhaustive. So I think as much as we need to look at the here and now, we've got, you know, £7 million of cost pressure on the social care side. We're not quite there on the NHS side, which Sean will explain, because we're still negotiating with Scottish Government. If we don't look at something fundamentally different and how we get to that, and that might be where we use directions in a slightly different way, where we're directed to spend more money in the prevention space or that third sector space, or what that looks like, then I think we could, you know, we might save it this year. We're not going to see the next year, we're not going to see the year after. And once we finally get to that point where we actually do shift and do things very differently than that at the moment. And that's my bit. I'm going to hand over to John Stewart, if that's okay, to go over the.
Yeah, do we want
Specifics.
to open it up to reflections and questions to your part, to presentation first, if anybody, Alan?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks. Yeah, I expect I don't disagree with anything that's there, so it's really nice to see it all together. I suppose just to reflect on two elements of the approach to the Alliance and working across the whole system that's not always explored. One for, I suppose, members in this room is about the important protection of that 6.3 million investment into the sector and the commitment to use it differently for community benefit. But it's also to recognise that that's unlocking much more of the money and resources that are already in the third sector. So colleagues will be familiar with the 170 million number that I have shared already. They estimate around what we would traditionally see in health and social care space is about 30 million. So if we say that 6 million of that 30 million is from here, we've still got work to do with 24 million pounds that's already in the sector to be able to do better. So creating the mechanisms for collaborating better together, making best use of the resources already out there. It's not just about constantly adding in, but it's about creating the space to do something differently with what's already there. And some wins we've already have recently in terms of us playing our part in the Alliance is now the investment we've secured into a new digital collaboration tool, which is being funded, which means third sector community organisations of all shapes and sizes will now be able to participate in collaborating for outcomes. It won't just be the big ones who would traditionally bid for money. It will now be organisations of all shapes and sizes that can use the digital platform to get involved, to share their stories, to be part of some of the community change we want to see, which has been a success. And the other idea, I suppose, of the Alliance working isn't it's simply about saying you're better at doing than we are, let's just shift kind of things over. It's actually very much taking a people-centred approach to help people move into specialist systems and care where they need it and comfortably move back out rather than being handed over to a system and waiting to be handed back, to crudely describe that. So it's around the protections and supports that always sit around at that community level, around people. We're having the same conversations in children's services as part of the children's services plan, for example, around this whole family support model. What does it actually look and feel like? It can't be about sending families all over to different services to signpost. It needs to be about that protection around that helps them flow, and including colleagues. So help colleagues access professional input, advice and back again, rather than having people moving around our systems. And I suppose those are just to highlight here two of the kind of unspoken pieces sometimes in this model, but we're still quite in that shifting from the systems to be much focused on the people. And I suppose just to note, we are already, although I understand it's challenging and difficult for our sector too in this midst of transfer, and we always said it would be, we're all sighted on the long-term outcomes of what we're committing to. So decisions today will decide what it looks like in 5 years time. And I think that's the point of Gareth's chart to show that's what we're aiming for. It's not fixed today, but it's what does it look like in 5 years, in a decade time, having made some things. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Any more comments?
Yeah, I think the presentation that Gareth's just given is a really, really great context setting for the workshop this afternoon. So I think all the points that Gareth raised, that people can reflect on them in terms of the strategic mission plan, because it just chimes so much with that population health framework, and I suppose as well it's different ways of working for people, and that's what the Delivering the Change programme is about, and it's that, as you've highlighted as well, Gareth, it's that how do we give people the space and the permission to get on and do things and try things in a different way, and have governance structures that don't get in the way of that. And I think that's a little bit of new territory for us all. So I think that's just something to bear in mind as well, in terms of that kind of freedom to act within those kind of parameters too. So no.
Thanks, Val. Mark and then Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And I think for me, it'll come as no surprise that my focus of all of this is to try and shift your focus away all of the detailed data that Gareth's given you there. And remember that right at the centre is actually a person, a human being, who has gone into hospital, who is fit to go into the next part of the journey. But because of the system we're working with, that patient then can't go to that next part of the journey. So what does that mean? That actually means that someone might not die in the place where they want to die. You know, it might mean that someone then can't go on and live the best life that they can over those next few weeks.
We know also that there's a deterioration in muscle mass, a deterioration in independence, a deterioration in mental health. So it's more important than ever that we absolutely change our culture and our mindset to drive the different ways of working, different ways of knowing. And I think Gareth constructed that whole system, Canterbury system, but that exists in Scotland already. It's just not being used under Guthrie. And Guthrie was very much set up for getting right for everybody, the same as Guthrie getting right for every child, or the child and the adult are the centre of every interaction. It's about how we do change. But I think it's also not just about changing the systems, it's about changing the people that work in those systems, the mindset and the culture of how we drive forward.
I think it's very refreshing to see these as IJB members. So I think everyone here is clear on the cost of focusing on acute crisis-driven services. And for me, it would be, Gareth, what is going to really make a difference is to ask for the IJB. So what is that you're asking us to do differently that we have clearly struggled to do for some time? So what does that mean, changing direction? To do it, to finally do what we have been talking and spend a lot of time talking about. So, but the reality is that at the moment we go dozens of patients waiting care packages at the moment. And I don't know how operationally that sits there, because I think the aims are here, but the immediate issue, how is that we're going to deal with that? And would change of directions now make a difference within the IJB? I'm thinking about the IJB just now, the space. So it would be really good to understand with clarity, and I welcome sometimes the jargon that we use, the way we share the message gets on the way for us to understand. But today it has been so clearly explained that I don't think we have any other way of not seeing what is being presented to us.
You want to come back to any of those?
Yeah, look, I think for me that there isn't a quick fix. There just isn't. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't have the staffing to just empty those people that are stuck in hospital, and I completely agree with that. I think one of the things that I think is a challenge in that space is that we're not even taking a whole system view of delayed discharges. Delayed discharges are saying that they come into hospital, they're then fit to go home, social care can't pick them up, so they're delayed. But then we've got, significantly higher than Scottish average of people coming to hospital in the first place. We've had colleagues in the hospital that I go to, others who work, medics in the hospital, who will point out the people who should never have been here in the first place. So we could get into this whole thing around the chicken and the egg. Did we start admitting people inappropriately prodding and poking them and sending them up and down the road in an ambulance from a care home for the last 6 months of their life, and bringing them into hospital doing tests that we know they don't need? Because if we actually look at value-based realistic medicine, we look at the research around over-treatment, it's there. So people with deep conditions in hospital, so their care needs have increased, so there's put more of them. And the problem is that you could argue that each way and you would never actually get to the right answer, because it's multitude and it's so complex. So I think for me, it's actually, how do we start to look at the things that stop people coming in the first place? How do we make sure that we have got those re-ablement services functioning at exactly the level that we can, and actually, so that people are coming out and potentially not needing care. So it's just this whole system thing that we need to look at, because at the moment, for me, that there isn't a quick fix to having 60 people waiting for care homes when you've got 4 beds. Just that you can't make that happen. And looking then at how your community hospitals work differently, how you can move people through the system. But yes, I think we need to be looking at it and look right across. I think for me, in terms of what the IJB can do, I guess, and it's one of the reasons why we want to start coming in more to the kind of having finances relating to the directions, and being a bit more, this is what we want you to spend on X, and then this is what we want you to spend on Y, and be more prescriptive around, holding the health and social care partnership account to actually, are you shifting left? Are you doing the things? Now, it's not going to be easy, and no one's got £1 million sitting in their pocket so we start doing active lives classes, but actually, can we assure you as a health and social care partnership, as IJB members, that we are doing everything we possibly can to move in that direction within the kind of the challenges we've got that Sean's going to describe very eloquently shortly, because I think ultimately we're not finding every possible way we can, and I think Alan's point's really good about that. If we do look at the Alliance, there is a lot of other stuff out there, there's a lot of funding, there's a lot of money that potentially we could access in that way, so that we can really start to focus down on our real kind of critical problems, because at the moment it's a huge piece of work. And I think, GP colleagues and working with them in a different way, and then I think that's hopefully what we'll see in the GMS review, that we're thinking about things slightly differently in that space as well. So it's just really about trying to bring it all together, but it's not easy.
Any further comments? Otherwise, we'll hand on to oh, sorry, Vicky.
Yeah, I think, it's lovely to see it all laid out, Gareth, but I think the one thing that we continually stumble at is getting the general public on side with that view, because we provide in our cottage hospitals, we provide absolute gold standard of care, and yet people still fail. They still do all the things that Mark described, and ultimately we lose them. But people still want their loved ones to be in the cottage hospitals. They still want their loved ones. They still run to TGRI when there's a problem, and trying to get that message for the general public to think, right, okay, this is not the way. And that it doesn't matter. We can get it right, but when they don't, or they're not getting that message, or we're not, it must be something that we are not delivering for people to not understand that actually running mum to hospital or wanting mum to be anywhere other than at home or the right homely setting for them. I don't know how we crack that, but it's the one thing that time after time after time we don't crack, and I don't know how we do that. Sorry to put a damper on it, but
No, it's not a damper at all. I think it's hugely important, and I think out of framing this without it sounding wrong. I think the fact of the matter is we provide an exceptionally good service to most people most of the time. I think the staff work incredibly hard. I think they do. So I think people actually get a good care experience. Everything would suggest. I'm not suggesting we reduce our standards so that people stop coming. I don't mean that at all. But I think what we're hearing from our staff, though, is it's becoming harder and harder and harder for them to deliver that exceptional standard that they have delivered for years and years and years, because the system is becoming so compressed. And we're starting to see people, in ED and staying in ED overnight and normalising double ups and things like that. So I think part of the challenge is that it's when people do come, the care's good, and I think people do still have that idea that health is, and in that way, it's probably something that we are the answer to everyone's problems, and actually we probably need to think about how do we help people to understand that there are other answers out there, and sometimes those answers are better for them, and sometimes, but yeah, I agree, it's part of how we engage the community in a different conversation.
So I think a really, really helpful presentation that gives hope at a time when without a conversation in finance that could be utterly depressing, frankly. I think there's actions that I think as an IJB you should be thinking about now. You should be looking to commission things differently now with the resources that are available to you. I think about some of Gareth's presentation and the different approach to assessment and what that has meant for connecting people to alternatives to traditional services. We've spoken about that for 6 years around this table. We've never actually enacted it. So what's getting in the way of us changing that approach? What's getting in the way of us asking our staff to deliver a different model around that? And can we get around that? Can we commission that in a different way? Can we get those staff operating under a different model? I agree. I think some of the care that we provide in cottage hospitals is fantastic, but it also contributes to what Mark's describing in terms of people's
decline.
Their decline. Absolutely. I remember visiting an hospital a couple of years ago during my care right place and seeing a fantastic OT kitchen setup. Absolutely brilliant for kitchen practice. And I asked, can patients come through and make themselves a cup of tea? No, absolutely not. Health and safety doesn't allow that. We have established systems that contribute to that decline. It's not the demand from what they're doing, it's the systems that we make them operate within. So again, what's the challenge from the IJB about doing things differently in that space? And thinking about the three horizon model, the decisions we take in this room and the directions we issue in this room about introducing new models around assessment, new models that break down some of those barriers to the activities that will keep people active and will help be able to get ready to go home again. Those fit within that horizon too that Gareth described. They lay the foundations for the longer term stuff that has to come in terms of building that capacity within the third sector, but there's a huge amount of capacity there already and a huge amount of discretion that we have around using the resources that are available to us just now to encourage us to do that. Because I think Gareth's teed that up beautifully for us.
Yeah, sitting and just fascinated by the conversation, and I think the presentation was excellent, Gareth, and what you hope to achieve is absolutely the right thing. I think the conversation has described the problems really explicitly again. So we speak about like the condition in the hospital when somebody gets there. We speak about loved ones wanting to get their person to a hospital, and that cultural change in terms of human behaviour is going to take quite some time. So in terms of, you know, we have to commission things differently. We also have to commission different things. So it's what we do in that earlier stage to stop the person's loved one requiring the thought of a loved one to take them to a hospital has to change as well. So from an IJB perspective, and it is really tough, and what Sean's about to present explains just how tough it is right now. But if we don't actually truly commit a collaborative model of engagement at a community level, so, you know, like the assessment for an example, I think when I hear David speak about assessment as a social worker, I think about a social work assessment, that's already far too late. It's what's the assessment when they come to your services, Alan, you know, and that's the shift we have to move. So it's not just about early intervention, but it's earlier thinking and earlier doing at every single level. So in terms of what can you do as an IJB, it's be brave. And when it comes to the directions and the money that sits alongside that, take some significant risk. You're going to have to take the pain in the shorter term to get that longer term gain. Otherwise, nothing will change. There's no magic money tree coming from the Scottish government. We've heard that. You know, an example just last week, or it might have been the week before, when the First Minister made a massive announcement around poverty and tackling poverty, but there was no financial resource allocated to that. 2 days later, there was £500 million committed should the SNP get into government again. I'm not being political, it's just factual things out in the public domain. £500 million committed to the expansion of free childcare. How does that marry up with a 750 million gap in community health and social care across Scotland? Well, 700 million is just the social care element of it. You know, so we've got to look at, we have to take control of that and take those risks ourselves, because nobody's going to step in and do it for us.
Stephen.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming back in. I think Vicky makes a really important point, actually, and there's no real blame here. There's just been a movement of systems and services over many decades, really, to where we are, and we've got ourselves to a position, really, where the message to the public has always been strengthen public services, build more public services. I've talked to loads of it, I've saying this all the time. Every time there's a problem in your life, we'll build you. When times were good, we'll build you a new service to respond to your needs. Now we've created the demand, we don't have the resources to fulfil that. And I see the alliance approach, for example, in Canada, I've had this conversation. This isn't about creating new services just in a local context. It's taking a service mindset out of it to make sure we're building the structure and the infrastructure and supports within communities to respond. It's the health creation conversation, which is creating the conditions for better health, not just services to respond or prevent bad stuff happening. Now, that's why it takes such a long time to create that shift. But we also need to be honest that this idea of localism and localisation for lots, including in this space for all the right reasons, has been moving services from a let's not take a regional approach, let's take colleagues and we'll put them in that office in that community. That's a step towards local response, but it's still a standardised service, for example. So the important bit of the alliance, I think, that will hopefully, Vicky, over time, health community conversations be had about there's no need to go into a public service or sit in a waiting list for that thing, because actually there's the support you need is already available or can be found in your community. And part of that, and I'm sure the experts in the room will tell what it's called, but what I've described as health confidence, which is that every time something doesn't feel wrong, I need to get to the health expert. Actually, sometimes there's just some things that you might be able to do in your own life to improve that and be confident about your own decision making about your own health. So again, it's not listed because you could list about 1,000 things probably on the list, but I do think that's an important point, Vicky, and I feel really strongly that the Alliance cannot turn into simply creating new third sector services. That's not what it's about. It's about investing into communities, that place-based response that builds the confidence in space, and Val's probably going to talk about that again in the next workshop. And I think that's really important for members, from my perspective, to ask members to hold on to here, that we're even hopefully over time we'll get rid of the commissioning language, because that's not what it's about. It's about investing in good and what's good and how we want to see that. So it's great to be having this conversation, precisely because I know from many calls around the country, this conversation is not being had. This is not a conversation that's available, because otherwise people are pressured into cuts, and I know Sean's going to tell us the really difficult situation. But if we don't hold on, I think, to Gareth's view, which is what we do now changes 5 years, changes in a decade, you'll get stuck in that service cut mindset, which won't be helping anyone. So thanks, Chair.
Okay, lots of good discussions based on your presentation. So thank you so much, Gareth, for influencing those discussions. I think it's very clear that we have very severe financial challenges, which Sean will talk us through in a second. But it's also very clear we want to look at transformation and transformation in the right way. And to do so, we need to be brave and make the right decisions at the IJB. So in order to inform that, Sean, it's over to you to give us this summary.
I just wanted to say, just before Sean starts, and hope this is okay, but Sean's obviously going to give where we're at the moment from a financial perspective, but just to be really clear, Sean's as much on board with this way of working as everyone else. He has to keep the books, he has to kind of make sure that we look at where we're at fiscally from an audit perspective, but Sean's not standing behind me every day saying you're not allowed to spend money, you're not allowed to spend money. He's as absolutely committed to doing things differently as anyone else. So it is a hard message that we have to give at the moment, and cuts and things do inevitably have to happen. But I just wanted to we can hear that part of it.
Thank you very much, and Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members of the board, professional advisors for the comments so far. Thanks, Gareth, for the presentation and where we want to get to. And as Gareth said, as interim chief finance officer, I'm very keen to support us to try and get there. But a balanced budget across the IJB is important and imperative for us to get to where we want to get to. This paper sets out the proposed delegated social work budget for 2026-27, totaling £124.25 million, reflecting the updated local government settlement and additional funding streams described in sections 3.13 to 3.14. It also highlights the significant financial pressure facing the IJB, including national pay uplifts, free personal care rate increases and underlying demand pressures, all contributing to a projected budget gap of £7 million. As summarised in section 3.19 and illustrated in Appendix 3. To address this report, the report presents a financial recovery plan supported by the detailed adult social work services plan in Appendix 4, including continuation of the recycling of care measures and proposed adjustments to charging structures. These actions are essential to meet our statutory requirement to set a balanced budget, as outlined earlier in the report of section 3.4. The paper also notes the Council's provision of a potential £2.8 million to support delivery of the savings plan as described in section 3.26 and reinforces the high financial risk associated with holding no general reserves, with the recommendation to rebuild reserves to 2% by 2027-28 as set out in section 3.29. The Chief Social Work Officer provides his views in sections 3.31 to 3.35. The board is also asked to note that the NHS allocation for 2026-27 is still subject to Scottish Government approval, expected in early April, and will be brought back to the IJB once confirmed, as referenced in sections 3.35 to 3.38. Overall, the report provides a clear and deliverable route to achieving financial balance while maintaining statutory responsibilities and ensuring safe and sustainable service delivery. I'm happy to take any questions and hope that we can get to the recommendations, of which there are quite a few.
Thank you very much, Sean. Let me talk that up to questions and comments.
Yeah, so obviously the cuts have hit the independent sector significantly, and then the provider, and I see that you're looking at around about £2 taken out the system. So I suppose first bit of view is what's happening to all those people that are accessibly and caring on getting it. I suppose that's the first thing. What's the IJB going to do about that? And the second is as proportionally, I think the sector's always worked roughly about 70-30 split in terms of in-house to council services and independent and third sector service providers. That's obviously going to shift because if the hours are coming out of the independent sector, which is the cheaper service deliverer, and proportionally the council's going to be providing the more significant care, which is more expensive in the terms of a longer sustainability kind of process. How's that going to kind of work? Is there going to be a realignment? So has there been a discussion with local elected members in terms of looking at the in-house service and potential cuts that need to be made in there to realign that kind of position?
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, totally get what you're saying. The 2,000 hours is probably higher than 2,000 hours to get to where we need to get to, and I totally appreciate this impacts. Appendix 4 is attempted to put some mitigations in there in reference to the in-house service. The in-house service has shrunk significantly this year. Now the ratio is probably near 80 to 18%. The number of hours that the in-house service deliver is now down at 3,000 hours, where it was up at 3,500, 3,600 before. So it's also taken a shrink, and it's had to take a significant chunk of the reductions so far. Ultimately, we're delivering less hours through the independence and through the in-house service. What that future means, we still have to have those discussions around about where's the strategic direction for the in-house service.
I suppose a bit is about what's happening to the people that are sitting in hospital beds now waiting or are in community not getting care, and how does that impact on the, I think Gavin at previously you'd said in 2030 we're going to have this massive, this is the peak of the older age and not having enough people to actually support that. Are we not just going to, by not providing the social care people need, and just exacerbating that issue that we're going to hit in 2 or 3 years' time before perhaps the impact of, and I don't get wrong, I appreciate where the purpose of what the IJB want to move to. I get that, and I think that probably was a sustainable solution, but it's not going to happen overnight. And I think 18 months might be a little bit too optimistic, perhaps. So 2030, we potentially won't have the full impact of that, but have this almost a crisis where we've not got the care providers because we've diminished the service so much, but we've got the needs still there, not being met.
Yeah, so, yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. It's the balance we're going to have to try as best we can to strike. So one of the reasons, well, there's a multitude of reasons that we're looking in that alliance space, and that we're only starting in that kind of third sector to kind of, ultimately, I don't see, given, and one of the big challenges is as our demographic peaks, our depopulation kind of bottomed out at the same sort of time. That's where we're looking at. So the gap between the number of working age adults who will live in Dumfries and Galloway, if the current trends continue, by 2035, will in no way meet the need of people. So what we're struggling with even at the moment is that we're all now, from our staffing perspective, fishing from a small pond. And one of the big challenges from a statutory point of view is the best in the world, the paying conditions are better for people in the public sector. You've got pensions, you've got annual leave, you've got all those things in a different way. So we keep just with the traditional models of, cash sits over here and then independent providers sit, and so that's going to be the next point of call to come to yourselves as the care at home providers through Scottish Care, through all those mechanisms, to see what does this actually look like? Can we actually, what does the future look like in a way that we can meet that critical need and care at home providers. The other part of the alliance piece, and we're starting a little bit in that complex care area, because that's actually a bit of the budget we really need to impact this year. Our older adult budget's back towards a better space, so actually it's probably not going to impact as much on people in the hospital in DGRI in the future. But actually, there is a multitude of different ways to meet some of the need, and we're not really utilising it, you know, so it's actually looking then at how do we utilise the different things that are there for people and things that, you know, so that then we hopefully ultimately will have enough money for the care at home for the people that really need it and the people that are, you know, out there that if we're only meeting critical need as a local authority, that doesn't mean that we're comfortable with and anyone that's not critical, you just need to wait till you are critical, because it's the same principle. You know, if you just wait till everyone's critical, you're just storing up a problem. So it's not easy. It's not, as I say, I think it's 2035. Our figures are rather than 2030, but that's, yeah, we need to think about it.
Could I ask what sort of size of the independent third sector are you expecting that are going to deliver services? You know, once these cuts are in place, I kind of sort of touched on it, Sean, in the paper, but didn't really give any kind of clarity about what that looks like in terms of, you know, current hours for the sector.
I probably can't give you a figures-based answer, but we do need to go away and we do need to look at what that actually means. As it says, in the older people market, it's not a lot less than what it is delivering at the moment. There are waiting lists. In the complex care space, it's significantly smaller than it is at the moment.
In that space, for example, one of the things we're looking at, so we're going to do a huge transformation piece around mental health internally, because the other thing is that you know, one budget piece as well, and you know, even thinking about mental health, well, if you're an older person in particular and you come to the front door and you've got a physical health condition and a mental health condition, depending on which way we send you to the front door, almost terminate your journey, you either end up in C4 here or Mid Park. If your dementia slightly more than your physical condition, or if your physical condition slightly more than your dementia, and then we send you into siloed community teams where I've got a community mental health team that sits over here, and we've got so there's a whole host of things we're looking to do to create efficiency in our statutory service, to right size that. We've got a lot of people, I think we've got about 2,500 people on our community mental health team wait list, caseload. They're not all people that need to be seen, and that's where we're looking at. The more we can free up the statutory money that we're spending on probably oversized statutory services in some regards, and change the way that we look at doing things around models of care, that's money that then becomes available in the partnership to do those other things. And it's trying to line all those things up. And but yeah, there is a plan that, you know, there's the same with the care home providers. We don't see a future where there's no independent care home. We don't see a future where there's no independent care homes. We don't, you know, but it's trying to get out the £7 million and balance that against, you know, because ultimately, particularly in the social care side of the budget, that's money that the council has to find from somewhere else if we don't balance the books.
Thanks, Tim. I want to touch a little bit on the people question they asked about, and then I'm going to bring this back to what Gareth said in the introduction around systems as well, because I think it's important. So we're well aware that there are human beings that are being impacted by the work that we have to do, and it's not the cut budget, it's to stop spending as much as we projected to spend. And I hope that doesn't sound pedantic, but it's an important point in terms of growth and demand and how we as a system have previously reacted to growth and demand. So we've always, fortunately, a significant, let's say always, in the last 8 years while I've been involved in these spaces locally, we've always had a significant and relatively high number of people in Dumfries and Delaware that assess needs that can't get their needs met immediately or to the fullest degree. And at the moment, I think we're more aware of the chronic nature of that. We're seeing detail in the financials that we've got here in this paper in more kind of in a more acute way than we had previously because of where we are in a fiscal sense. So what we're doing in the background is continually kind of prioritising who gets those. So Gareth's got a really difficult job in terms of the highest expenditure care packages, signing off on all of those with him and his team as an example, and I give some professional advice around what the risk would be. So we're looking at things like that. Alongside this, going back to David's point about how we've always assessed, we've aligned a small but significant number of social workers to undertake specific reviews to look at what people get. And they're looking at what people get or are assessed to have been given on a system approach to that very traditional, you either get care at home or you get nothing. And I'm being a little bit blunt there, so apologies for that, but it's a very traditional model. And that's similar to the fact that we've got, you know, a higher number of people coming into hospital. Our system's quite traditional in terms of what systems and what services we have. Although we're in a really, really difficult position this year, this current financial year, we started with a projected overspend of around about 15 to 16 million, and we've got that down to around about 8-ish, Sean. So there's been a lot of work to not spend as much money as was projected to do. What we really have to be clear about is because we've been quite traditional in our structures and our services and our systems, is we've got to use this chronic financial position as the platform to move and do the different things. And that's really, really hard. I absolutely appreciate that. So when I said earlier about some of the difficult decisions we have to make, I think the approval of this budget and the recovery plan is one of those difficult decisions I would recommend the voting members. So it is a tough position to be in. We are keeping as close an eye on those people, those human beings as we can. We're not getting the needs met in the way that we used to. But we're also now, in those reviews, we've highlighted a lot of assessed need because that's what our system always used to do. That isn't necessarily required in terms of critical care. So what can we do differently in those spaces? And we would like to be in a position where we can realign any budget savings that we make in the future if this model continues to those types of service. And what we're seeing in Sean's proposed budget is just a snapshot, a photograph of the chronic position where we are. So we have to take it in the context of Garrett's earlier presentation and actually the workshop that he's going to move into this afternoon around we need to make this really approve this budget with that recovery plan, acknowledging it's not what any of us would want to do in an ideal world, but it does give us the platform to make those positive improvements as we move forward.
I mean, it's a really difficult position. Sometimes at that crisis point is actually when you've got the opportunity to innovate, and you have to take that. And then, Sean, I know in Appendix 4 you talked about some of the impacts and looking at some of those impacts, but I suppose just in terms of it talks about the paper that what do you call it, diversity impact assessments will be done, you know, as each of these programmes is working up, but they should be being done at the start of those programmes to help that thinking about what are the impacts and how do we mitigate them. And I appreciate some of the answers about how the mitigations might be, the different ways of working and the delivering the change, but I think it's so important that those things are documented and you're really clear about that, and that they come back to some committee of the IJB, so that actually that helps to kind of see how things can change. But it is a tough space to be in, but as I said, sometimes it is that opportunity for just that reinvention and doing things differently.
I guess I am not as close as this work in terms of complex care and physical disability, the payments and so on. And I need to take comfort in professional needs and people that work around this. But so we were talking about older people, but clearly the most affected group of people that are these people who actually are in need. They go hence where they are called complex needs. So, and innovation is good and all of that, and these words that we all say at times. But what does that mean though? So if we approve this, what is going to happen to someone who has a care package just now with complex care? What is that they are going to see that's going to be different? This is trying to understand from a person that is not a social worker, is not within this team, what does that mean? Because we can all sit in here without really understanding the consequences of something that we need to do, or how has we come to choose this is the group that we need to kind of decide that these are the ones that we are going to kind of reduce the offer. So just a bit more understanding of that would be definitely welcome from me in terms of the budget.
I mean, I'll let Stephen answer it from the kind of the assessment point of view. I mean, essentially, we have a budget for each part of the system. We've got a budget for care home beds, we've got a budget for complex care, we've got a budget for older adults, and we've been grossly overspending that budget for many years, and ripping through reserves to do it. So the reality is now that the work we've done in older adult, which I think Nicola has articulated, is causing some challenges both in the independent market and the people that work in that space, but also the people that are stuck in hospital because of those decisions. That's now broadly balanced. The budgets we haven't been able to bring back into what the budget allows us to do this complex care, mental health, and physical disability. And you're absolutely right, it's because of the nature of the need in those spaces is different. And I think though that when we are reviewing, so we're seeing people that perhaps in the past would have been given a level of care and a level of support that we just wouldn't give people now. So from an equity perspective, we're actually looking at, if you're coming in now, it's critical need only. There's a lot of kind of other things, but the reality for us is that those are the two parts of the budget that are significantly overspent, and we have to, we have to get that budget back in alignment. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to take that kind of perspective, but
I suppose Gracie's question was around those who have already had an assessment and currently getting support. Gracie, did I pick that up correctly?
Yes, and then that inequity too of the new people needing an assessment that are not going to get what other people already have. And listen, I am coming from a place of no one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more understanding how we have come to this and how is that how we done an impact assessment, and I'm sure you may have done it. How do we know that what we're proposing to do to be the less impactful thing for the people who are already having and experiencing this, living with a disability, living with complex care needs?
So those who are currently receiving a package, if we speak about in the complex care area, so those with really complex needs, learning disability, etc., we have seen a significant rise in the amount of money we spend on the cost of care, as opposed to necessarily the amount of care. So there's issues such as that, and what we're not currently doing is saying we're reducing those packages. But what we are doing when we're assessing new needs, we're looking at what is absolutely essential and required right now. And Gracie, you're absolutely right, that will be a degree of inequity there in terms of those who are in the system and those who come into the system. And that's a reality that we're currently living with. Yes, we do a quality impact assessment, and we do it in advance as well, as opposed to at the end of the process in relation to the previous point. So looking at that, but we're also looking at, so those who require new assessments is one thing, and that's like the bulk of the people who come through who require our assistance for good positive outcomes. But we're also looking at those who've got the most complex needs, where we have to look at highly specialised services. And from a contractual and commission and procurement perspective, we've already been driving some really hard kind of conversations with some of those providers, and we've significantly reduced costs there, but not reduced the actual care that people get. So one example, we were paying something like, exact costs, and I don't want to mention the organisation's name either, because that wouldn't be fair in the public environment, but we reduced the cost of care by what was it, about 30 to 40% in that case, Sean?
I'm not quite sure which one you mean.
Okay, so the very high, yeah. So we reduced the cost of the care for this organisation by around 30 to 40% without reducing the care for the person. So we're doing things like that. We're also looking at what does the accommodation and the supported accommodation requirements in the future look like for this cohort of people who are going to move through and grow and develop. So we're looking at the data there. So we're putting better infrastructure in place. And it's not just about building things for things. I'm speaking about that basic need of somebody's home here, Alan, as opposed to building a service. So we're looking at the longer term as well to try and mitigate into the future what some of those impacts would be. So I think, like Sean and Gareth and Caroline's leadership in this space over the last like 8 to 10 months has been exceptional. And I do believe that all of the different factors that have to be, I don't believe I know that all of the factors in a really complex set of circumstances have been fully evaluated as they can be. And there's no complacency around that. It's looking at all the what if questions that come in are constantly reevaluated alongside that. So there's a whole multitude of things that we are doing. And your point about complex care is really key because they tend to be younger people who have got lifelong issues that will be more impacted in systems for longer. In the older person space, that's different because the turnover is significantly higher, and therefore we can have less inequity because people move through systems quicker. So hopefully, Gracie, I'm not going to say that will give you any comfort because it's a difficult position for us all to be in, but the considerations that need to be made certainly have been.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gracie. No, there's no doubt that this will impact on individuals. It will mean longer assessments and service being delayed, but it's not all doom and gloom. You know, I'll probably sort of refer you to the wider resources within the partnership and how we start to look at them and how we can shift the funding to meet these needs. This is not forever. You know, if we can get through a balanced budget this year, we can start to create reserves and we can start to look at how we can deliver services differently. The Scottish Government, whilst not identifying any funding, have indicated, you know, that they're willing to provide support for complex care, for coming home, for regular discharges. So we need to, the partnership, be well manoeuvred and well positioned to be able to sort of access into that. Also talked about the £2.8 million support plan from the local authority, which is ongoing funding to help us deliver this change and to mitigate against some of the measures. So as a partnership and as an IJB, we have a lot of flexibility in there about how we go ahead with this. Now, totally acknowledge it'll impact independence, it'll impact on unpaid carers across the whole system. But we as an IJB have to work together better to minimise that impact on individuals and get to Gareth's vision for the future and the PSP acronym is.
I think the reality of what's happening at the minute is that people are paying privately until they get their budget sorted. That's that because people are desperate. I think that's what we've seen as a care provider in the region. So, you know, and we're looking at whatever packages it was being agreed this time last year, we're talking to now, and I think with the increases that you're proposing, Sean, in older people services, that's perhaps 3 every fortnight now we're agreeing up packages that are coming through each week, which is incredibly difficult for a sector to sustain in terms of workforce on a spot purchase basis. And you know, we're looking at staff contracts and trying to keep people in employment, and that's really incredibly difficult when there's massive gaps in that. So obviously the other cut that the sector's facing is that the Scottish Government aren't giving the full uplift to meet the new national wage rise. They're not giving the 15.5% raise for the national insurance wage, only the 13.8, I think. So that in essence is a cut also to the sector. So I suppose, is there any consideration for the sector to look at, I suppose, diversifying their portfolio of services to support that, and perhaps picking up some of the stuff that statutory organisations do, and whether obviously we deliver real services. I'm sure that's something that other providers could look at support, and if that's a model of care, is that an opportunity for providers to look at?
Yeah, I think for me, probably everything needs to be on the table. I think we really need to, I know that through Bev and some of the other social work colleagues are working with that kind of help on collaborative, and I think we really need to kind of move that work on this speed at pace, and that's the challenge. You know, it would be nice for this to be a 3-year plan, but it needs to be a 6-month plan in some regards, you know, because of the multitude of challenges got around that. So yeah, more than happy to look at working with providers around different ways of delivering that care, what that might look like. And as Sean said, the money that if we sign off the recovery plan as it is today, and that money that's been set aside with the council is a kind of, that's enabling us to look at other things and other ways of working and different things. It's not just kind of bottom line money just to go into the abyss, because as you see, we need to transform. So it's actually a really, really good opportunity for us to utilise It's something that we need to do things differently. As assurance is, it's very tough, but there is some flexibility within the way it's set up budget up this way that we can look at some transformation.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Sean, for using our unpaid carers for me. Because I was surprised to see in the report from the Appendix 4, in the big, remember in the larger picture, fairly small, £125,000 of unallocated monies in that budget. Knowing how much unpaid carers save for the NHS and sort of services, but I thought that 125,000 would have been very well spent. And I'm commenting at you, but not about you, so I don't expect it to you. We know how much carers save other services, but we also know now how much support they need to do that. If we can't support them, they can't do what we would hope they would do to help us, and what we're talking about here in terms of finances. As Nicola said, over the past year, there's been, put my glasses on, stuff around national insurance costs rising, living wage costs, perhaps energy costs over the next few months, and the opportunity or otherwise to offer your staff a very small raise in what they're paying to keep them there, so they don't end up in Aldi's and Marks and Spencer's, which is a general progression in industries. I would hope that we could find some way to support the carers in industries in that way. I think we know that within the next 12 months, perhaps, there's new legislation coming in about rights to a break, which will be costly. It also brings in, I think, Stephen probably knows this better than I do, about the right for an adult care support plan for a young person's assessment, and whatever comes from them and the cost of that. I heard during the week at the Cares Programme Board, 3 of our current providers saying if things stay as they are, they may not be able to provide the services provided over the past year or so. So rather than a saving being helpful, it may have a more negative effect, or the effects we didn't expect. And if there's any way of looking at this, I think it might be beneficial in the longer term. I think when we move to what was anyone going to say, I don't think it's just the services for unpaid carers. I'd imagine Alan's got a whole list within his arm of services who are in the same predicament, and will be working extremely hard to figure out how we can deliver next year what they're delivering this year. So rather than just ranting on, it was just a comment about that one that made me think about how if we look at some of the savings that we're making in a different way and say, well, are they really going to be a saving for us at all? And what does the longer picture say about if we make these small savings?
Thanks, Jim. Kirsty and then Richard.
Thanks, and probably just to come in the back of what Gracie was saying actually, and just not asking you, Stephen, but there probably is how we're assessing need now on people who are new, but we have got a statutory responsibility to do that reassessment of those who are receiving care already. And we should then, to show that equitable of the new and the current people or ex-ante people that are on that, we should be applying that same criteria across the piece so that that equitable approach to it. With just a comment. Thank you.
Yes, Kirsty, Richard.
A question for Sean, financial question. Obviously, we see the absolute necessity to balance the books. It's a question about the reserves. Have we had reserves in the past which we could call on? And if we're going to build a surplus, that money not better be invested in investing in Gareth's plan and to look at prevention rather than deal with the causes. So why do we need reserves? Why can't we just rely on local authority to have that reserves in hand?
Yeah, thank you. We have had reserves in the past, and there's the IJB we can hold some reserves, and we had £10 million post-COVID of reserves, which we used some of it for investment into things like discharge to assess and measures like that. But ultimately, those reserves were probably used to plug where we are now. They were used to rather than take the tough decisions 2-3 years ago, we used reserves to counter making these tough decisions. And in theory, we probably should have done what we're proposing today. We should have done that 2-3 years ago, and we didn't do it. That's why we are where we are. We need reserves. If you look at the Audit Scotland report in the paper, the use of reserves is balancing the bottom line at the moment, but reserves should be there for emergencies, or perhaps that package that Stephen refers to, where that high cost individual had to move to a £2 million a year potentially package. We need reserves to be able to do that, because we can't expect our day-to-day budgets to be able to accommodate that kind of emergency measures. That's why we need to build up reserves. Reserves can be used for emergencies, but they get to a balanced budget. It's like, I can't remember what Stephen mentioned here, we're not cutting our budget, we're cutting our spending. Our budget has increased from 65 million at the start of integration to 124 million now. So unfortunately, most of that is going on price and inflation-based stuff, albeit it hasn't touched employers' NI. That's where we need to get to, and that's why it's so important that we get to a balanced budget to enable us to shift the money across our IJB. And it's very difficult with two funding partners in such deficits. It's very difficult to make that change. So, this pain that we're faced with today is hopefully not forever, but it is real.
Thanks, Ken. Just on the back of Jim's contribution around the balance of the unpaid carer support budget. So we know on the narrative about the 228, which is what we call the discretionary programme board money. I think that's what we've referred to. So there's I guess a proposal in the savings to reduce that. So it's not taking the whole budget away, but to reduce that to only critical. I suppose to Jim's point around, there are kind of wider conversations that might still be had. Is it still in scope, just to add the specific question, although we might accept that the saving, to balance the savings plan, that needs to be in the mix? Is there still scope, I suppose, to have another conversation around, could we make those savings elsewhere and perhaps in the long run not out of, or are we in a situation where we just have to take it out tomorrow because we need to kind of balance the position? I'll hopefully explain myself. So that gets us to a balanced budget position. Is there still conversations to be had about actually shifting in year to maybe protect some more of that carers' money? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, we need a balanced budget today.
Yeah.
To be able to access 2.8 million,
Yeah.
which is a very important factor that we need to consider. What we do with that 2.8 million is a conversation that's all open to us.
Great.
And I hope that sort of answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that money was unallocated was just being completely transparent. The carers budget was sitting in about 5 different places, and we were kind of paced because it comes in like different tranches from different parts of government with different mechanisms of funding, etc. So it kind of was never allocated. So it wasn't like we took money away from someone. It was just when we got to the round, it was kind of unallocated money that hasn't been used. So we looked at it as part of the savings plan. I think though that, I don't know, was Viv Gratian at the carers meeting that you were at?
Yes.
Time? Yeah. The programme board. So hopefully you'll see that we are absolutely looking at working with Claudine and the wider carers networks to really start looking at. I've got another slide that I can show you that shows that if we're delivering 44,000 hours of statutory care and we look at the kind of estimations of what that would mean, we're probably delivering 650,000 of unpaid care every week in the Peace and Galloway. So there's two things: if the carers stop caring, the unpaid carers, and the third sector falls over and the independent sector falls over, then we think we're in trouble now. So absolutely, it's one of the, at the forefront of what we're looking to do is we build that wider system around, and they are part of our alliance and working in that different way. So they are absolutely central to what we're doing.
I can just reply, thank you, Gareth. I thought it didn't sound that I was preaching or trying to.
Not at all.
I think you moved on, I'm sorry.
Not at all, thank you.
Thank you. So I think we had quite a good discussion, we had lots of questions, and I think it's very clear it's a difficult decision and not an easy one that we want to take, definitely. But we are in very difficult times as well. I think, you know, in order to be sustainable long term and make the transformative changes we want to do, we might need to be brave as well. And I think that's probably very clear from all of the different discussions, and there will be some hard decisions to be made. So I know, Sean, you have quite a few asked. Do you want to talk us through the different aspects that you want us to approve?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I'll just read down the report, if that's okay. So I'm back in the IJB to note the delegated social work budget for 26-27 of 124.247 million, reflecting the updated local government settlement and the additional funding streams as per section 3.13 to 3.14.
Right, so I think we have noted that.
Note the financial pressures facing the delegated budget, including the impact of national pay uplifts, free personal care rate increases, distributional changes to GAE, and the need to agree and deliver a financial recovery plan for 2026-27 to address the identified budget gap summarised at 3.19 and address the statutory requirement to agree a balanced budget.
Okay, so we are also noting that.
Asking the IJB to agree the Adult Social Work Services Savings Plan for 2026-27 set out Appendix 4, reflecting the continuation and expansion of savings measures, including recycling care models, adjustments to non-residential charging structures, service redesign and re-enrollment approaches, other savings proposals contained in Appendix 4.
Okay, can I ask voting members, are we agreeing to this? I see people nodding, so yes.
Yeah, sorry, isn't in terms of that, it's also a voting decision member, but I think the impact assessment part of this of each of these is important that the IGB decide on it, that they're done and that there's mitigations in place in relation to them. So it's just a
Yeah, absolutely. Could we capture that as an action, please, that we can cite ourselves? Thank you.
Confirm delegations to the IJB Chief Officer to incur spending within the £124.247 million spending limit and to progress the measures reflected within the savings plan Appendix 4 to contain spending within that limit.
Happy to confirm. I see people on it, thank you.
Note the progression of the delivery of this savings plan will be closely monitored and reported to the IJB, the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee and the Sponsor Social Work Services Committee on a quarterly basis alongside the quarterly budget monitoring reports.
Happy to vote.
Note that the Dumfries Galloway Council has made an allowance of £2.8 million within its budget from financial year 2026-27 to allow for consideration of support for the Integrated Joint Board's Adult Social Care Savings Plan. That the savings plan set out at Appendix 4, once approved, will form the basis of the board's submission to the council seeking the release of that £2.8 million. Approve the strategic intention to rebuild general reserves to 2%. Approximately £2.5 million on the social work side by the end of 2027-28, and note the high financial risk associated with holding no reserves in 2026-27 as per section 3.29.
Okay, again, voting members approving this. I see noddings. Thank you.
Note the risk and implications of a balanced budget is not supported, namely that an immediate recovery plan would be triggered, including a freeze in new expenditure, recruitment and approval of care packages as per section 3.28.
Okay, we're voting that.
Note the Chief Social Work Officer's opinion in section 3.30 to 3.34. Finally, note the timetable for the NHS Dumfries and Galloway budget and that the IJB will receive its NHS allocation once approved by the Scottish Government, expected in April 2026.
Okay, must be that as well. Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you very much, everybody, for getting this through. I know it's not a pleasant piece of work, but hopefully this will set us up to a much more productive and much more enabling working and collaborative approach for working forward as well. And that will be part of the discussions we're having continuously as well. So thank you very much. Any further comments or questions in regards to this finance item that was discussed? That's fine. In that case, we're running slightly early. Our next agenda item starts at 1 o'clock, but I ask people to be back very much on time because somebody will be working and remotely. But that will be a slightly longer lunch break anyway, so enjoy your lunch and thank you very much, everyone.